Right. This morning, this is such a Torah portion. I teach bar mitzvah kids, right? Usually I yell at them because they didn't learn Hebrew enough and it's hard to get them to. This week, I'm glad they don't know too much Hebrew. Because if the kid knew what she was reading, my face. So she's reading this to me and I say, don't translate it. Right? Let her think it's about, it's puppies and, it's fine. This week, it's X-rated. Is he okay? Samwise, you keep playing, bro. Because this week, it is about the deepest issues of being a human being, the social circumstances, which is the destabilizing part of this, but really the internal struggle of human being, right? I was going to start today's session by singing the Cole Porter song, Birds Do It, Bees Do It, Even Educated Fleas Do It, Let's Do It, Let's Fall in Love, because that's what the Torah portion's about. It opens almost like this opening salvo, like the beginning of Beethoven's Fifth, with three cases. Each one of them make you say, oi! Like, oi! So here's the first one. We're on page 1112. We're page 1112. Three cases. Three moral circumstances. Right? Ready? Page 1112. 1112. Ready? Ki Teitzei lemilchama alayvecha v'natno Adonai alecha biyadcha v'shavita shivio. Ready? Case one. When you take the field against your enemies, the Lord your God delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman, and you desire her, and would take her. And the translator, my dear professor, right, H.L. Ginsburg, very fine European gentleman, could not translate what it really says. It does not say, take her to wife. No. It has something else in mind, right? Right? There's something else in mind. You see this captive, the soldier has been fighting all day, battling, and this is in the old days when fights, we didn't have drones, you had to fight and kill people. This is Game of Thrones, right? This is swords and spears and knives and blood and guts and on you. And the soldier gets paid not by a paymaster. The soldier gets paid by whatever he can steal during battle. So once he takes the city, he's smashing down doors and entering into storehouses and shops and homes, and he smashes down a door, and there in front of him is Scarlett Johansson. And she's wearing Victoria's Secrets.
This is the second time you mentioned it.
She's a Jewish woman whom I respect. I know. This is what I'm doing, right? This is so much cheaper than therapy, So that's case number one. And you say, this is in the Bible? This is Bible stuff? This is Bible? Right? Wait, it gets worse. As they say on television, wait, there's more. Look at the next page, verse 15. If a man has two wives, one loved and the other unloved, and both the love and the unloved have borne him sons. Oy, Vezmer, good God. What kind of screwed up families do you people come from? Wait, and it gets worse. Here's the worst one, at the bottom of the page, verse 8. Come on in, get a seat. If a man has a wayward and defiant son, who does not heed his father or mother, and does not obey them even after they discipline him, his father and mother shall take hold of him, bring him to the elders of the town, and they'll say, this son of ours is disloyal, defiant, he doesn't heed us, he's a glutton and a drunkard. Thereupon the men of the town shall stone him to death. I wrote that on a plaque and put it in my son's bedroom, We should whisper this to every bar mitzvah child, right? Right? So we have three cases here. Three cases. And you say, what? What is this? This Torah portion is one of the last Torah portions where the Torah is sort of summing up. And it's getting us ready to enter the land and to build the society of the promised land, the new society. And so we're going to deal now We've dealt with, last week we dealt with shoftim, we dealt with legal issues, with how do you organize the judicial system, and how do you organize justice, and before that we talked about how to respond to poverty, and how to respond to and then how do you create a religiously, loyal society. Now we're going to deal with real stuff. You want to build a society? You got to build it out of real people. And real people are not saints. Real people are not, they're not passive. Real people engage in relationships. And here are the 3 relationships that the Torah begins with, right? Courtship, marriage, and children, family. And each one of them is wrought with such passion and such contradiction, such difficulty. Courtship, marriage, and child rearing. And the passions that attend those relationships, these are the things that drive people crazy. This is the way people kill each other. The Torah begins with the story of Cain and Abel, brothers killing each other. This is what causes, this is instability. And it's built into the very structure of being a human being. Because this is the way that we get more human beings in the world. Right? Until Brave New World is invented and we do it in nice, clean, antiseptic factories, this happens, at J-Date. This is J-Date. So here we got the 3 paradigm relationships, courtship, marriage, and child rearing, and they're each remarkably unstable because we're dealing with deep passions. How do you deal with these passions? So look at the first one again. Let's go back to the beginning. Ready? You take the field against your enemies. The Lord your God delivers them into your power, and you take some of them captive, and you see among the captives a beautiful woman and desire her and would have her and would take her. Now, by the way, let's for a minute, let's change the case. Instead of war, let's make it more benign. You work in an office building, and you get into an elevator, and there's Scarlett Johansson. All right, fine. But you work in an office, and in the next cubicle, there's a woman. And now, what does this say? It's not just, before you get to the war part, this is about masculine sexuality. So I said it's an X-rated lesson today. Men are visual. Every woman in the room knows this, right? Men are visual. Look, the great Rabbi Jerry Seinfeld once said something wise. He said, what shoes are to women, cleavage is to men. Translation, no woman, and I'll attest to this, cannot stop in front of a shoe store. Right? If there's shoes in the window, she's going to stop. If you marry a woman, you learn this, right? And you learn to be patient with this. And it's okay. It's okay. And then she comes home with, I found them. They're so cute. So I bought 4 pairs of them. And for men who own 3 pairs of shoes, you wear dress shoes, casual shoes, and sneakers, you say you needed 4 pairs. Well, yes, it goes with this outfit, and it goes with this outfit. Verves, I didn't know this, right? So that's women. Men, if a woman walks by and she's wearing something, a man is going to stop and look, right? The story I took Zeta, my papa's papa, right? Papa Sam lived at the Jewish home, lived there till he was 97. So it's the summertime, my son Yona and I would take Zeta for a walk. He was tired of the Jewish home. He didn't like old people. He was 96, So we would take him up to Northridge Mall. It was hot, so you have to walk in the mall. We'd take him up to Northridge Mall, and Zeta was this little teeny guy with a walker, and he's a polyester, everything, and he's walking, and we're walking through the mall, and it was summertime, and a little teeny bopper, teenage girl comes walking by in the little shorty shorts and little tippy tops, and Zeta... And I said, Zeta? And he says, you gotta look. You don't look, you're a dead man, So what do we have here? So you have this, no, this is very serious. You got this man, and he's programmed by evolution to do this. This isn't his fault. This is evolution. 100 million years ago, Men who stopped and looked at trees, men who stopped and looked at rocks did not make it evolution. Men who stopped and looked at women made it through evolution, natural selection. Sorry, what? Say what?
I said, tell my wife that.
I'm trying. Why do you think I'm giving this lecture, right? So forget the war. The war adds another layer, which we'll get to in a minute. Let's just take the normal circumstance. A guy gets in an elevator and there's a woman there. And what is the fantasy that flashes through his mind?
The elevator stopped.
Yes, right. Yeah, well, but that's there's this whole a fantasy flashes through his mind instantaneously and completely out of his control. He would have her. That's the fantasy, right? Now the question is, if you're going to build a society, you've got to deal with that. You've got to deal with that because that's a fact of human condition, a fact of human being. How do you deal with that fact? With that piece? If you say to the guy, now here's one strategy. This was tried by a religious tradition called Christianity. You say to him, tisk, tisk, tisk. Lust is evil. In fact, you have heard it said you will not commit adultery, but I will say to you that even a man who looks at a woman lustfully has committed adultery with her in his heart and should and tear out your eyes rather than look at a woman with lust. Okay? That's the 6th chapter of the book of Matthew. That's the Sermon on the Mount. That got Jimmy Carter in a big trouble. Some of you are old enough to remember Jimmy Carter, right? Now, what does that mean? So you're saying this is a destructive emotion. This is a destructive trend, a pattern in human behavior which is highly destructive. It's a sin. That's one way to look at it. That's one way to look at it. That's one way to attack the problem. Okay? It has advantages and disadvantages, that way of attacking the problem. The Jewish tradition chose not to attack the problem that way. Look at the next line. Look at the next line. You shall bring her into your house, and she shall trim her hair, pare her nails, discard her captive's garb. She shall spend a month's time in your house lamenting her father and mother. After that you may come to her and possess her, and she shall be your wife. Then you shall no longer, should you no longer want her, you must release her outright. You must not sell her for money. Since you have had your will of her, you must not enslave her. So the man gets in the elevator, and there's this woman. And he looks at her, and in his mind there's this fantasy that comes immediately. What's the Torah's problem with that? What's the problem with that in general? The problem with that is that, certain men think that's a license. Right? There's a lot of this in the news today. Certain men take that as a sort of license. Certain men take a certain license from that and decide they can do what they want. Now, if you condemn that as lust, that's one strategy. What does the Torah want that man to do? Control. Well, control why? What's missing from his fantasy? Her personhood. He is seeing her as a two-dimensional object. She is Miss March, or Miss February, or Miss April. He is seeing the outside. He has no notion whatsoever of the inner being of that human being. He doesn't see her as human. Remember, we did this 2 weeks ago. We talked about the Parsha Re'eh. This is a question of perception. What does he see? He sees a projection of his lust, a projection of his desire, a projection of his need. What does he want? He wants to control her. Having her is not just a sexual thing, it's a violent, it's an aggressive thing. He wants to control her. What do you want him to do? The first thing you want him to do is to stop. Stop. Put in a gap, a time, a temporal gap between the fantasy, which comes instantaneously with a rush of hormones, it's a physical thing, and any action that he would take next. Stop and put a gap in there. The Torah has a notion of a gap of an entire month. But I'll tell you, if you could get a man to do this for 30 seconds, you'd already change the human condition. Right? Right? If you're a Stanford frat boy and you see an attractive girl who's inebriated, If you could have induced 30 seconds of self-awareness and reflection, you could have avoided a tragedy. Much less 30 days. 30 seconds of, what the hell am I doing? 30 seconds, but the Torah says I want 30 days. So what does the Torah say you have to do? Now, look at the it's really kind of remarkable, actually. Take her home, and then what do you do to her? Yeah, it's great. It's trim her hair, pare her nails, and take off the Victoria's Secrets and put on mourning clothes. What's mourning clothes? Sackcloth and ashes, and let her bewail her parents. So now what do you have? You have a bald lady with no fingernails sitting on the floor of your house crying for 30 days. Still attracted? Still want her? So what are you trying to do? You're trying to introduce a notion that she's a person. And that he has to stop and see her as a person. And that only when he sees her as a person, then can the fantasy play itself out. But if he doesn't see her as a person, now this is completely sexist. I'm not going to apologize. I could tell you that there are words in here which indicate that maybe her consent is involved. I could stretch the language that way. No, this is about men and their sexual fantasies. And what we're trying to do here is teach men, particularly young men, to try to see the object of their fantasies as a human being. The kid who looks at me, I once caught my kid, when we first had a computer, we had it in a study carrel in the living room so I could watch what my kid watches. And my son had a picture on the computer that you would not have imagined the son of a rabbi would have. In the old days, we hid these things under our mattresses, right? Now you have a file, like homework, and if you click on homework, what you end up with is Miss February, right? So Miss February is there. Actually, it was, but anyway, Miss February and Miss March and Miss April, they were having, anyway. And so I walk by, and there's my son, and he's frantically trying to hide it. Right? If you ever want to hide something on your screen, it won't go away. Right? So I stop and I say, "What are you looking at?" He says, "I did nothing, Dad. I was doing homework." I said, "No, come on. Show me what you're looking at." So I looked at it and I said, "Okay, let's talk." "Oh, Dad." This is what happens when your dad's a rabbi, right? I said, "All right, who is she?" I'm Miss Smart. I said, "What can you tell me about her?" "She's really hot." I said, "Not dressed like that, she's not. I mean, she's like so hot." So if you're dealing with a 13-year-old, you ask the question, "Is she nice?" "Well, she's nice and hot, I know that, but is she, what's the quality of her character?" "Oh, Dad." So that's the problem. You only see the outside. I want to know what kind of soul this person has. I want to know if she's a person. I've taught you your whole life to look at people as people, to see their soul, not just their bodies. Tell me what kind of person she is, and you can have the picture. He said, "Oh, Dad." Right? And now, that's the problem. We've socialized young men to see the outside of a woman and not to see the woman as a person. Right? Not to see the human being in that person. Now, I preach this all the time. I teach this to the kids all the time. And across the street, there is a billboard right across this. This is the truth. I didn't make this up. There's a billboard right across it. It's huge for Beverly Hills plastic surgeons. And it has a woman whom some Beverly Hills plastic surgeon bought a Mercedes with because Kanai Nahara, and for $3,500, he will make you look like her. I don't know if it's each or the pair, but if you get a discount on the second one, I don't know. And it's right across the street, and I'm trying to teach young women that that's not your being. And I'm trying to teach young men to see women with some sense of humanity, and that's right across the streets. I'm losing the battle. Yes, Sherry?
I think it's even more revealing that he watches her grieve, which is like an extreme form of being human.
Yeah.
Right? He's just not watching her be in the world, cooking, doing everything, but that's when you really see someone's pain and suffering.
Yeah.
And often they're the most unattractive.
Yeah.
So
That's
I think
right.
That's an interesting.
Yeah, he watches her grief, and not only unattractive, but at that moment he's going to understand that she's somebody's daughter,
Yes, it's like. And she
that she's
has
somebody's
pain.
sister, right?
Right. So
So here you have the pattern. So what's the pattern? Yeah, okay, Danny.
You also recognize that she has needs.
Yeah.
And those needs trump your needs.
Yeah, don't use that word.
Sorry.
You'll only
I'm on the forum committee.
you'll only distract me, you know. Did you hear that Barack Obama is an American? Did you hear that? Who knew? So you're going to distract me, Danny. No, you're right. So say it again. She has
That she has needs.
She has
and
needs.
All of a sudden, it's not about that first visceral, physical need anymore. It's
So let's
recognize somebody else's need.
Let's pursue
over
this.
yours.
You bring food to a house of Shiva so that the mourner doesn't have to cook. So as she's sitting on the floor crying for his parents, what's he have to do? Cook. He has to cook. He has to feed her. He has to protect her. I mean, it's a whole. You've really changed the relationship, right? You've changed. You've as you said, you've pushed her humanity in his face in a manner which is it's radical, right? You want this woman? Great. Let me show you who she is.
To the most extreme.
To the most extreme, right? Yeah, Bobby.
Also, you alluded to it. He brought her into his home with his parents.
Yeah, Mom, meet what's your name again? Scarlett. You know.
And he's a daughter-in-law, and not just somebody lustful that he saw on the battlefield.
Right.
There's, as you said, there's nothing so much as a damper as having your parents in the house.
Right. Now,
What do we do with them?
the battlefield introduces another piece to this, but before we get back to the battlefield, let's just sum this up. What's really interesting about the text is it doesn't condemn his lust. It doesn't say, shame on you for thinking about that. I didn't say that to my son. I didn't say, shame on you for looking at those pictures. I said to him, there's something you're leaving out. Let's see if we can put it back. Because I understand that the lustful look is programmed biologically. We have to culturally overlay it with an ethic of humanity. But condemning it is not an ethic that works. That's why the Sermon on the Mount, as an aspiration, as a moral aspiration, it's brilliant. But as a practical matter, it doesn't work. Because if you say to a man, shame on you, you should not have lust, don't touch that woman, he'll simply close the door and do it anyway. But if you say to him, let's explore what the next response ought to be. Let's overlay that lust with a humane response, with an ethical response. You change the pattern of response. You change the pattern of response. It doesn't. The Talmud has a wonderful saying. It says, "Ezehu gibor." Who is a hero? Right? It doesn't say ha'oker et yitzro. It says ha'kovesh et yitzro. It doesn't say the one who uproots his desire. The purpose of this is not to have a man who has no desire. That's not a man. The purpose of this is to teach a man how to control his desire, right? How to be able to put that gap in there so that he recovers a sense of her humanity before he takes the next step, before he acts in the next way. And having recovered a sense of her humanity, then the question is, now what? What's the humane thing? What's the ethical thing to do next? Now, the whole thing is set on the battlefield. Why on the battlefield? I think the office elevator or the coffee shop would have done just fine. Right? You walk into Starbucks and there's Scarlett Johansson drinking a cafe, and you sit down, and you would have her, says the Torah. The battlefield introduces the notion of worst case scenario. What is the worst case scenario? It's the one circumstance in human existence where there are absolutely no rules and no restraints. No rules and no restraints.
No humanity.
And no humanity. And you have been socialized by the military, as it were, by the confrontation, to see your enemy as not human. And in this case, you are giving free rein to a man's aggressive urges. Freud had this notion that men are driven by these two urges, eros and thanatos. So you have given the thanatos, you've given the aggressive urge, all that testosterone is pumping through his body. And so you add this element of complete lack of control. There's no external social control. None. So my daughter was a dorm counselor at Indiana University, and every Friday she would gather the 55 young women on her floor, and she would say to them, ladies, do not go to frat parties. And they'd say, oh, Nessa, but their boys are so nice. No, because at frat parties there are no external social controls. It's a crazy thing that we send kids to university. This is a digression. Right? Every human culture up to ours took the people with the least amount of internal control, 18-year-olds, and put them in a circumstance of the most external controls, the military or the convent, so that they could be socialized into internal controls. We have it the other way around. We take people with the least amount of internal controls and we put them in universities, in college dorms and frats where there are no external controls. And then we get them drunk. We get them sauced. And then we say, isn't it strange that there's so much sexual assault on campus? Like, this is the story, guys. What do you think is going to happen? You think the Brock Turners of the world are the aberration? It's the norm. Most of it doesn't get reported. It's a crazy thing we do. So you're in a circumstance of no external social control. You have a person with no internal control, and the Torah says, okay, I'm not going to tell you you're evil. I'm just going to tell you got to do one thing first.
The problem is, this is evil.
Why is it evil?
It's evil because the Torah could have said,
Yeah.
if it was on a moral level, that any of us who are not committed to defending the Torah, every single word, every single time, would admit and would recognize.
Yeah.
This is not rape, it is delayed rape. And this is unconscionable. And the Torah should have said, it is an abomination to take a woman against her will as your concubine, slave, slash.
So you're right.
It's just wrong.
But I think that if you would have said that here, he would have said, to hell with it, I'm taking her anyway. This creates a circumstance in which you sublimate and delay until it and then eventually extinguish the desire.
But it doesn't.
It does.
She's still taken against her will as a sex slave.
He can have
This is an abomination.
Yeah, okay, but he
You
can.
weren't as good as you are. and
Yeah.
You are the best.
No.
What you just said would have been laughed out of the room.
Why?
Because it's ridiculously primitive.
Okay.
It is an objectification of women.
Yeah.
It is a destruction of their rights. And it is controlled male domination of women taken in war.
Because
the
if you-
Torah
okay,
is
okay.
wrong about this.
You're right.
And it has taken us thousands of years
Okay.
to correct it.
This is a good sermon. No, I love it. I love you.
God.
No, come on.
You're better than this.
Yeah, but you see,
The Torah doesn't need your defense here.
I know, but
Hashem voto.
I wanna defend the Torah on this level. Okay.
Go ahead. Scarlet what?
Now you leave her out of this. Now you're getting personal.
We'll talk about this later.
Someday she's going to walk in this shul, and that's going to be the end of Torah stuff. That's going to be like my last day at VBS, you know.
Rabbi, I have to argue against that.
Oh.
That is all
We have a rape
about-
defender.
No, I just think that's totally hubris because it's the lens of the modern perception of how we understand the relationships between men and women. Like, you're looking at your lens today and saying, this is the objectification of women. And don't get me wrong, I don't believe this is not okay, but this is a modern lens of what you're placing back on the Torah and saying the Torah is abominable when that's not the society at the time. It wasn't written in 2016.
But that society also generated the belief that male and female, he created them. And that equal divinity, that equal Tselem Elohim, inheres in both men and women. That is an ancient view. The problem is, that ancient view is true. This ancient view is abominable.
No,
And
women were,
defending it
Okay,
is
okay.
and
embarrassing.
All right.
woman was made from the rib, right? That was, their view was that she was subservient to him. And I'm not endorsing that, but I think there's a case to be made that this is a very modern lens that you're looking through and saying,
It is. We'll get to the argument in a minute. Bobby, go ahead.
Okay, I have been waiting for several years now to say the following, and I thank the good Rabbi,
Rabbi Gelman.
yes, Rabbi Gelman. We sit, as a woman, I come every Saturday, I love this, but I sit here, as a woman, wondering when we're gonna tell the story from my standpoint. And while I love your analysis, I feel, violated is too strong a word, but I feel, I'm sitting here surrounded by a bunch of men and some women. Subject, all right, I have difficulties, figuring out where I fit, and frankly, I'm tired of hearing the same story about my second-class citizenship over and over again out of the Torah. And I would, I say this with deep respect, but we gotta somehow bring this around, not to some, extreme leftist, feminist, whatever. We gotta bring this discussion into something where I fit, where I'm not on the verge of being raped by every guy in the room.
Okay.
That's how I see it.
Okay. Shh. Wait. We have a discussion. Douglas?
I want to bring something I learned from Rabbi Shulman.
Okay.
The Torah is our ancestors' attempt to discern the divine.
Right.
It is up to us to find the universality in what's there,
Yeah.
and what's a product of the time and place.
Okay.
I think reading it with the 21st century sensibility, 21st century sense of sensibility is just, you're unfair to the people that wrote this, 3,000 or whatever years ago.
All right. The question is, does it suggest a direction of an ethic? And Rabbi Gelman, his attack on the text is correct. It's, if I were to sort of synthesize this, but it needs another step. It needs to acknowledge, it needs to do what it's trying to do, which is acknowledge the humanity of the woman and say, 30 days, let her go. You can't touch her. I mean, and that's what's missing from the text, that her subjectivity, her position as an actor in this drama, she's just an object here. She's a sex object, and then she's just a political object in the story. She needs to become an actor, not just an object, a subject, not an object. Gloria.
We're just looking at an evolution.
Yeah.
We don't get from step this to step that
Yeah.
suddenly. And
Yeah.
we're just looking at evolution and the gradual development of
Okay.
personhood, humanity.
Right, so that's one way to look at it. That's a historical, sort of developmental way to look at it. My suggestion, which the good rabbi disagrees with, contradicted, is that because you're dealing with a very deeply ingrained impulse, you have to speak to that impulse, and it was impractical to say at that point, you have to slowly introduce this notion into the drama. We're going to talk about this in a minute when we get to the child, because there's also a fantasy involved here. By holding out the fantasy that you can yet marry her at the end of the process, you acknowledge his desire, but you sublimate it. The rabbi rightly condemns that as a form, because she doesn't have a voice in this. And Bobby condemns it because she doesn't have a voice in it. And that is exactly correct. That is exactly correct. Yes, please, Ron.
It doesn't take into effect the economic factors. Can he afford a second wife?
Yeah. Yeah. With your wife sitting here, I'm going to say, Ron, can anybody afford a second wife? I mean,
she works.
if she works, right. Right. Nina and I thought of this. I gave a Purim talk once. It was a Purim talk, so don't get angry. That we should abolish the ban on polygamy, not for sexual reasons or male sexist reasons. It's just because there's too much work in the household for two people to do. Right? Like I don't want another person to sleep with. I want another person to do shopping and work and be at home when the TV guy comes to fix the TV, right? So I said to Nina, let's get a wife. Let's go find someone who wants to do that with us. And well, she hit me with a frying pan, but she wasn't.
Get a husband.
Yeah, well, that would be fine with me. I have no problem with that. Yeah, no, seriously. Listen, at my age, yeah. If I could get a guy that knew how to use tools, that would be I would fall in love with such a man, If he shows up with power tools, he can have anything. Yeah, go ahead.
I remember many years ago, Rabbi was talking about this section, and he said at some time in the 2nd century of the Common Era, and he quoted somebody, the rabbi said, this never was and never will be.
We're coming to that part. Not this one, it's the next one. Yeah.
Child.
Yeah.
But I also noticed that this section comes right after Shoftim. And in Shoftim it says about magistrates and officials, they shall govern the people with due justice.
Yeah.
And I think this follows on to that idea.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of due justice. Where is the justice in this?
Yeah.
In terms of if you see a woman and you just come back from the battlefield and you see this woman and you're overcome with your hormones.
Right.
Where is the justice?
Right. Well, the context, in the historical context, the fact that you preempt rape, and that rape is not a tool of warfare, that's already a moral advance. But the rabbi is exactly right, that by eliminating the woman's voice from the narrative, you've still violated her. The phrase in Hebrew is actually kind of interesting. If you look at verse 14, Vahaya, and it would be, Im lo chafatzta ba, if you don't desire her, V'shilachta, it's in a shilach, which means it's an intensive form of the word shalach. V'shilachta linafsha. Yeah, shilachta linafsha, which means what? You send her to herself. It's a very nice phrase. You acknowledge that she has a nefesh, that she is a nefesh, right? And you can't sell her. You don't own her. You don't possess her. So, it's a very interesting phrase. So let's stop for a minute. I know you want to continue, but let's take a look at the next one. Because I want to do all three cases today, because they're very important. All right? V'kitiena le'ishte. Now Rashi, the commentator, and the Midrash, based on the Midrashim, connected the three narratives. He says, okay, so the guy marries her, but he already had a wife. So now what has he got, Ron? Now he's got two. And because the second wife was the wife of the girl that he saw in the war, she's the woman of his desire. The first wife is the woman he's been married to all this time. She's she's the householder, she's the balabusta. So now he has these two wives, right? The one who is desirable and the one who's just there. You don't have to connect separate narratives, but Rabbi does a nice job of this. So you have two wives, one loved and one unloved. And both the loved and the unloved have borne him sons, and the firstborn son is the unloved one. When he wills his property with sons, he may not treat the firstborn son with disregard of the son of the unloved. He's dealing with it as a property issue. But there's a deeper human issue here, which is what you said a moment ago. Can you afford, what happens with two wives? It's impossible. It's impossible to create, you're going to end up with this terrible rivalry here, right? And then the real question is, and we'll just take one more second on this because I want to get to the next case, which is, it's not two women, it's just one. Right? Every marriage has moments of passion, and every marriage has moments of quiescence. And the question is, how do you treat each other in the moments of quiescence and await the moments of passion, or rekindle the passion of marriage? That to me is a very difficult issue. When a couple comes to a counselor, to the rabbi, and says, we don't love each other anymore. The question is, do you rekindle love? Does love rekindle? This is, to me, a very and how do you do justice to the relationship that's been? That's, to me, a really interesting issue. All right, let's do the third one. Here's the famous case. A famous case. Ready? Now, again, it's male-centered. If a man has a wayward and defiant son, mom comes in here in a minute, right? If a man has a wayward and defiant son who does not heed his father or his mother and does not obey them even after they discipline him, his father and mother should take hold of him, bring him out to the elders of the town, at the public place of the community. They shall say to the elders of the town, this son of ours is disloyal and defiant. He doesn't heed us. He's a glutton and a drunkard. Thereupon the men of the town shall stone him to death. That's the kid, not the father. Thus you will sweep out evil from your midst. All Israel will hear and be afraid. It's like, you got to do this once in a generation. That's all you got to do, right? And then kids behave themselves. All right, what's going on here? The Talmud, as Michael said, had a terrible time with this because it's just so morally obscene. And the reason the Talmud had a terrible, besides the fact that you're offing a kid for being a kid, whose problem is it? No, it's the father's problem, right? The kid is being a kid, and it's the father who can't stand the kid being the kid. What is the Torah trying to avoid? What is the natural progression of this circumstance? A son is intransigent and mouths off to his father and mother. What happens normally? Yeah, either the father whacks the kid, right, or sends the kid out exiles the kid altogether, right? But what you want to avoid is a circumstance where the father whacks the kid.
Better to stone.
Watch. Wait, I'm not done yet. Wait.
You are definitely not.
Yeah, I know. What is the father, let's go back to our perception question. How does the father see his son? At the beginning of the narrative, how does the father see the son?
Challenge.
Why is he a challenge? He can't control him. So the father has a presumption that if you're my son, I own you. You should obey me. You should do what I tell you to do. You should act toward me in a respectful way.
Honor your father.
Honor your father and mother. Question is, what does that mean, by the way? How far does that go? But the father has the presumption that you owe me your obeisance. You owe me obedience. You owe me respect. You owe me, you owe me, you owe me. All right, Michael, can I ask you a question? In a counseling circumstance, because you're a shrink, besides being a great rabbi, in a counseling circumstance, when a parent comes in and says to you, I'm angry at my child because they don't respect me, how do you deal with that circumstance?
Try to understand what that conjures up in the parent, what that means.
So where is it coming from? Where does that kind of feeling come from?
Come from within or without, or some kind of combination.
Yeah. So you got this father. This father has this idea that I had kids and that my kids are supposed to do what I tell them to do. Now, 90% of this is, you all know this. What's the backstory? That's what his father did to him. Right? He's just replaying the script of the family, right? So you're supposed to do what I tell you to do. You're supposed to be nice. You're supposed to be respectful of me. You're supposed to cater to me. You're supposed to serve me. You're supposed to worship me. And the kid, what is the kid doing? The kid is trying to build a boundary and be his own person. The kid it's not just that he's an intransigent kid. I'm sure they had ADHD back then too. The kid is trying to be his own person. The kid is trying to push the father away, so I got some room here. And the father gets so angry every time the kid does that the father picks up a stick and beats the kid. And beats the kid. And beats the kid. That's the problem, okay? So one way, the Torah presents the problem as an intransigent child, but I want to present the problem as an abusive, controlling parent. Now, what do you do about that? What do you do about that? If you say to the father, you're a bad father, you know, you need some family counseling. I'll get to you in a minute. He's having a tough morning, gosh. No, God forbid. No. It's a chavrusa. I need a chavrusa. It's good. If you say to that father, bad father, go get counseling. I've said this to fathers, right? What is that father going to say? It's not my problem, it's my kid. It's not a parenting problem, it's a bad kid. I had a bad kid. The bad seed. Remember that? The bad child. Disrespectful. Usually he blames it on the mother, right? You know, the mother screwed up the kid. She shouldn't have catered to his needs, right? And the father wants to whack the kid. Before, you want to ask, Tommy?
I just wanted to say, bring him to the elders, bring him to the...
Yeah, Watts said that's exactly right. If you say to the father, you're a bad father, if you say to him, you need parenting coaching, if you say to him, it's your problem, not the kid's problem, the father's going to laugh at you and go beat the kid. What's the first thing you have to do in that household? Get the kid out of the house. The important line here is, right? Take hold of him and bring him to the elders of the town. You place the child in the custody of the community. Now you can deal with the circumstance. You're not, see, what you would imagine it would have said is, why doesn't the father have a right to kill the kid? That's the question. Why is this the community's job and not the father's job? You would have imagined that it would have been the father's job to whack the kid. If you have a bad kid, if he's a problem, if he doesn't pay attention, if he disrespects you, kill him. Whack him. Spare the rod, spoil the child. That's the problem with America today, is that you're all a bunch of Dr. Spock babies that were breastfed whenever you wanted, and you're all indulged and soft. I can do this. I can run for president. You know? I can do it. But the problem, that's not the problem. The problem is, get the kid out of that household. Put him in the custody of the community. Yeah, go ahead.
The father is emotionally far too close to the situation. He can't pull back in order to deal with it.
And he can't control himself.
Can't control himself, so
Right.
that way the elders of the community are a little more back from the situation to be able to deal with it.
Do you see the parallel between the first case? In the first case, the guy who desired the woman, it's the space, and it's also where you bring the person, right? The woman is brought to his home. His home is full of people. His parents live there. Here, you bring the kid out of the space and you put him in the communal space where he's protected. But he's not. Now watch what happens next. Watch what happens next. If I said to you, we're going to take your kid and we're going to teach him and we're going to take care of him, you're going to say, no, you're not. I'm going to beat the hell out of him. I'm going to suggest to you the following. I don't think, the rabbis of the Talmud, this is where the rabbis of the Talmud said, lo hayav lo atid lihiyot. This never was done. And I think what the rabbis are saying when they say, by the way, and when they say lo haya, it never happened, that's a historical observation. When they say lo atid lihiyot, that we will never do this, first of all, think of the chutzpah of that. We just erased a law from the Torah. You can erase a law from that? What do you mean, lo atid lihiyot? The Torah says what you're supposed to do. What gives you the right to say, I'm not going to do it? What do you mean, I'm not going to do it? It says what you have to do. But when you say lo atid lihiyot, the rabbis are first of all acknowledging this is morally obscene. But I think they're acknowledging something else which is deeper. It was never meant to be done. It was never meant to be done. This is the fantasy. The fantasy is we're going to kill the kid. And you have to hold that fantasy out in front of the father in order to distract him for the moment it takes to get that kid out of the house. Because the father wants the kid dead. And unless you play into his fantasy for a moment, you'll never get hold of that kid. The fantasy is we're going to stone the kid. Don't worry about it. As soon as the father says, great, take the kid, now you get the kid in protective custody. And now you can settle the circumstance. Either raise the kid someplace else because his father is unfit to be a father, or somehow reconcile what happens in his household. But I don't think that it was ever meant to be done. That's why the last line is so odd, right? You'll sweep out evil and people will hear and be afraid. What other commandment in the Torah says you'll do this and people will hear and be afraid? It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy, right? And the fantasy enables us to save the child from that particular household. Yeah, Jerry.
I think we can also learn a little from the Akedah, from the binding of Isaac's story.
Yeah.
How does that start? That starts with Abraham sneaking out of the house and not telling Sarah.
Yeah.
So, and this does exactly the opposite.
Right.
It says both of them have to be there. So, although it's not politically correct to talk about gender differences in personality and psychology and so forth, I think human experience says we can rely on women to value the relationships and to be practical in times when men are just hurt from.
So you think that the father wants to beat the hell out of the kid, but the mother's not going to let it happen.
Right.
And the court comes in, intervenes on the side of the mother
Exactly.
to protect the kid.
Opportunity to speak.
So the
You can't
Talmud,
speak at home.
so in the Talmud, there's a long discussion of this section, and the rabbis say they take all of the details of the case and use them to qualify the verdict, right? So they say it's got to be mother and father who both come. They both have to speak. They both have to condemn the kid. It goes on and on and on and on. But then it ends with the things that Michael pointed out, which it never happened, and it never will happen, because we won't let it happen, because this is plainly immoral, which tells you a number of things. If you look at the Torah text from within, I think it says that was the original intention. But even if you don't believe that, okay? Even if you accept my colleagues' and dear teachers' verdict that this is just hopelessly retrograde, right? At least you see something else in the tradition, which is that the rabbis of the Talmud were willing to use the dictates of conscience to rewrite the Torah. Right? Many of you were here in 1992 when Rabbi Schulweis gave a sermon about gays and lesbians. And there were a number of traditional people in the synagogue who said, the Torah is very clear about what we have to do. Who are you to say no? And Schulweis's response was, he quoted this. That's what a rabbi's supposed to do. That's the purpose of having rabbis. Otherwise, the Bible would have been the last Jewish book ever written. Why do you have a Talmud? If you don't have the power to say, my moral vision has changed and now I understand that something's lacking in the original text. So now the response is, so you're going to follow fads and fashions. And Schulweis's answer was, he had a very nice statement about this, writing on this recently, where he said, I'd rather be worried about falling down the slippery slope than have my feet stuck in concrete. I'd rather deal with the charge of moral relativism, which is a serious issue and needs to be taken up, and fads and fashions, than to be stuck with an ethic that I never have the power to change. And if it's an either or choice, that's the direction I'd rather choose, one rather than the other. So what do we have here? By the way, there's one more piece of this, just for the fun of it, right? So remember, Rashi connects the three cases. He sees the woman in the ruin. He takes the woman as his wife. She becomes the desired wife. The other one is no longer desired. The child of the other wife is no longer loved. He becomes rebellious against the father. The father rebels against... You see how Rashi connected them? Play it as a circle. Suppose the boy survives. Right? And he was the kid. Now let's ignore Jerry's beautiful comment for a moment. His parents testified against him. So now he becomes a soldier. And in warfare, he sees a woman. Right? The whole thing repeats itself. This now becomes one of those familial scripts that repeats itself generation to generation. Because having been the abused child, right, and it was his mother who betrayed him, or his mother that allowed it to happen. She enabled. Right? Then he becomes the abuser, and the whole cycle begins all over again, which is kind of sad, which is terribly sad. Yeah.
His daughters were exempt.
What?
His daughters, I guess, were perfect because
Daughters never mouth off to their parents. As the father of a daughter, I will. Everyone knows this. Never. Daughters never do this. Never.
What did your friend want to say about the last paragraph?
Mark, tell us about you, Ben Sora or Mora. Go ahead.
The main point is that you can't ever say what you love about the Torah unless you have the courage to say what you hate about the Torah.
Okay.
About Ben Sorer,
That's this case.
there is one universal truth. Once you realize this is not the Word of God, this is the Word of God folded into the words of ancient, prejudiced people and ancient good people, but it is not purely the Word of God.
Mm-hmm.
Once you get that fundamental liberal assumption of all conservative and Reform Jews, you can then look to the higher good and the higher message,
Okay.
and avoid simple hermeneutics, eisegesis, in which you're trying to constantly defend the Torah, in which, in the end, all your defenses are suspect, because they never hear you say, this is a part of the Torah I hate. When I started teaching, my first session with congregants was always, let's go over the parts of the Torah you hate. And you need to hear me say, these are the parts I hate. Because the parts you hate are much more revealing about you than the parts you love. But Ben Sorer, and you know this better than I because of your deep love and commitment to Beit Tshuva, is there are children, and you have advised parents of such children, that basically their only course is emotional stoning, is what we would call tough love, is the separation from their child. The idea that you're constantly involved with your child, constantly able to help them, is simply, tragically, not always true.
Mm-hmm.
And the universal message of this abomination in this Parsha, well, in all of its level of deflected rape and deflected child abuse, the one universal lesson is that we are not completely in control of our children's destiny. And there are times when their self-destructive behavior cannot be ended, cannot be ameliorated by even the deepest love.
Good. That's nice. That's good. So I think all three cases have to do with control. And all three cases have to do with all of these other human impulses which get in the way of perceiving the humanity of the other. In the first case, it's lust or desire or rage or violence that gets in the man's way of seeing the woman as a human being. In the second case, it's the rage, it's the complication of a family that gets in the way of a husband seeing the humanity of the wife. And in the third case, it's a father's need to control, or the kid's intransigence, one or the other or both, that gets in the way of the parent seeing the humanity of the child. And the question that the Torah is trying to create is, what kind of a society do I have to create in order to avoid the tragedies of these circumstances? How do I create a social container for these human impulses? A social container that will lead me to justice and not to wanton kind of family violence. How do you create a social container that deals with this stuff? And it's an issue. We haven't figured this out yet. That's what the stories we read in the newspaper about. We haven't figured out how to do this yet. Michael.
Just to put this a little lighter note. You know my older son. When he was about 11 or 12, he had done something we didn't really like. And I said to him, how many times do I have to tell you not to do that? And he just looked me in the eye and he said, 213.
Smart kid. Smart kid. Someone, yes, please.
You used the word, the text used the word son, but you used the word child and kid
Yeah.
interchangeably.
Yeah.
Is there any presumption that, there's a presumption here that this is about a youth? And,
Yeah, yeah.
In the context of this time, the family lived together, and that the son could have been 37 years old.
No, you see, so that's very good. So the Talmud, see, the Bible doesn't qualify it, okay? The presumption is you have a kid living with his parents, right? And the Bible doesn't qualify it. The Talmud plays this game. So the Talmud says, look, he's described on the one hand as a son. He can't be a child because a child is not obligated is responsible for his actions. He can't be an adult because he's still described as a son. So what's the one day of your life you're neither a child nor an adult? The day of your bar mitzvah. This happened on the day of the bar mitzvah. Now, by the way, if you think about what happens on the day of a kid's bar mitzvah. This is actually kind of likely, I want to kill my kid on the day of the bar mitzvah. And so that's one of the ways. So the whole drama is reduced to one day of a kid's life, you see. All right, the day after you turn 13, that's the most dangerous day of your life. That's the only day. But so that's a game that the Talmud is playing. Yeah, David.
I have a question from Rabbi Gilman. If 3,000 years ago, Torah has not suggested what they did in regard to the lady with the soldier and the son with the father,
Yeah.
and there was no instruction from Torah, what would have happened to the lady and what would have happened to the child?
I'm sorry.
It's not, I think the question isn't, the question is if it hadn't said it. The question is what should it have said? And here,
What would have happened if this instruction were not given for the soldier how to behave and how to treat that woman? Keep her for 1 month, have her to shave her head.
Oh, then the woman would have been raped 1 month earlier, as opposed to being raped 1 month later. Now that is a distinction which you as a man might make. It is not a distinction I think any woman in this room would make.
yes, but that's why I argue with you, because I think that in the same sense that the stoning of the child is held out as a fantasy, the idea that she's sexually available to him after the month is also a fantasy, and the Torah presumes that he's not going to want her at that point. But that's the fantasy that's an incentive to keep him from acting on his impulse from the very beginning. That's the only place where we disagree. Otherwise, I agree. Go ahead, Adele.
I think that I agree with what he's saying, because this was written 3,000 years ago, and we have to look at
Yeah.
that context. But if you look at it with a contemporary eye right now,
Yes.
other cultures where a woman has been taken against her will and she has been raped,
Yeah.
she's ostracized and killed.
Right. That's another problem. It's the use of rape as a social. Right. So Adele's pointing out something very important. It's there in many cultures. We've learned a lot about this since Jewish World Watch has engaged us with Darfur. That the rape of a woman is a way of destroying the family structure, and because the woman then is ostracized, and the child that might be born is a child of nowhere, and you end up with the use of rape as a political tool is what's happening. And here you have this notion of you marry her. You have to marry her. She becomes part of, and she's not. So that's a different way of looking at it. We need to stop because I got to go do bar mitzvah. I want to wish everybody good Shabbos. Please control your impulses today. Thank you, Rabbi Gelman. Congressman Schiff this afternoon. Stick around.